Okay, great. Well, I'm really excited about this next series of podcasts we're going to be doing around a book that's going to be published on the 26th of April by Routledge. And the title of the book is Leading Sales Transformation. And it's a compilation of chapters from sales practitioners who've written about different aspects of transformation from their different perspectives. But what I'm really excited about this book is that it is how it's kind of developed as an extension of the master's program that many of the contributors have been on, who are now alumni and have wanted to continue to develop their writing skills in different ways. Either, some have gone down the academic route and written journals for academic publications, but this book is a compilation of students who wanted to contribute to a business book that's coming out quite soon. And it's been inspired very much by Christine Eastman, who's not with us for this first session that we're having. She's not 100% well at the moment. But Christine is a unique, inspiring coach to many of the students who've been on the master's programs, and her passion is literature. And she has encouraged many of our students to use literature to help inform their own practice. So you will find, as we interview those people attending this podcast series, references made to various literary works, which is unusual and different. And I'm delighted to have on this very first podcast Grant van Ulbrich, who's in fact an author, will be an author for the second time round with this book. Again, hugely inspired by Christine to take the step into publishing, if you like. So Grant, welcome to this first podcast. So super to have you on the program again.
Much. Thank you. It's good to be with you again, always.
Yeah. So Grant, I wonder if you can talk us through the journey that you've taken to contributing to this book that's coming out in a few weeks' time.
Absolutely. And thanks again for having us on the show to launch this book on behalf of all the authors and the contributors. My section is chapter 3, which is titled Coaching Salespeople Through Change, Redemption for Willy Loman. And if you don't know who Willy Loman is, I would question if you're really in sales. But he is the main character in the Broadway show and also the play and the book, Death of a Salesman. And so, what inspired me to write this section was I was a student of Finding Your Written Voice with Christine. And that was after the master's program and right before I went into the doctoral program. So, it was a great transition for me as a global sales leader to learn different perspectives on how to tell the story. And after all, that's what we do in sales, right? We
Yeah.
are storytellers, And so, how do you pull the academic side to the literature side and enhance your mind so that you can write and tell stories differently? So, Christine has been an amazing inspiration to do this. And it all stems from Consalia. So, you truly stand behind what you do, which is transformation.
So for those of you who may not have, or those listeners who may not sort of basically know the story of Death of a Salesman, can you give us just a very quick potted outline of what the story is about?
Yeah. So, Death of a Salesman, Willie Loman is the star. He's an aging sales leader who's been, back in the 1930s, 40s, the time frame of yesteryear, on door-to-door salesman. So the old days where you would actually carry the suitcase of your goods and go to different places and call upon them for sales. Well, as you can imagine, with the advancement of time, that type of sales almost started to fade away, and he found himself very depressed, very gloom, supporting his family. What does he do? He had two boys, a loving wife. And how does he transition? Well, Death of the Salesman, you can probably see and sense the direction he went. But I brought that in because I wanted to write that into my story of how do you coach salespeople through change? and through that so that they can transform and have different outcomes. So that's why I chose him.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great inspiration because and this is dusting back my memory of having studied the book when I was at school, but there's a sense of sort of hopelessness, isn't there? A sort of inevitability of failure, I guess, and that there was nothing that he could do that's going to change that trajectory. And I think it's a quite interesting this idea of picking up on that book.
It was all
And
about change for me. He couldn't manage his own change.
that
And
exactly, yeah,
he didn't know how. And as I argue often with different podcasts and research and globally with people, we haven't been taught how to manage change. And as a sales leader, how am I supposed to actually lead my salespeople? When you think about salespeople, they are caught in the mix of change
yeah,
from the pressure between the organization and the customers themselves. So, Death of a Salesman is a true story, that really can resonate with so many people.
yeah. I mean, there's so many takeaways from that book about sort of resilience and purpose and change and taking ownership. So what I'm intrigued about is if if you were the coach of Willie Loman, okay,
Mhm.
what sort of interventions might you have taken that would have maybe resulted in something quite different?
There you go. Well, you're going to have to read the chapter to see that because it is a very different story. Um, but we have to first go back to what was the purpose of finding your written voice and why did we include literature, which is what Christine Eastman championed us to do. And literature gives you the ability to start to formulate the narrative of how you tell stories, right?
Yeah,
So if you reflect on what inspired me to do this, I read a lot on Truman Capote and also Willa Cather. And I just love the way that these authors almost brought you into the script of the story. So, in the way they narrated their story in a discussion point from the interviewee to the interviewer, I found that very fascinating because you can very quickly dive right into the story and almost act as if you're there. So that's how I chose to write my chapter with Willie Loman. I actually went back in time. I take the reader back in time and I invite you almost as if you're standing there and you're seeing me as a coach have a coaching conversation with Willie. And in doing that, I'm using the scared so what model, which is the first model for change. And I'm coaching Willie through his feelings, which is what scared does. And we're having a deep, honest discussion about, well, what is it you're feeling? You're in aging in sales. You've been in sales your whole entire career. What could you do? And how could you do that? And I use the scared model to do that to help him formulate a different decision. And then from there, I coach him in continually to say, well, what's your outcome? What's your so what? And how will you do that? And in the book, the way I've written it, like Capote and like Willa Cather, in that almost like movie script style, so you can actually jump into it, you're there with us and you can see the coaching experience and you can see almost literally see him and envision him coming up with a different solution.
yeah, that's a great way of doing it, and writing it. It's a great illustration of again of how you can link different literary sources to actually inspire a story that you want to kind of share. And I guess in the case of the narrative that you have in your chapter, you are demonstrating, the power of taking ownership of the problem and the actions that you can develop as a consequence of those. Is that right? Is that what comes out
Absolutely
of
true.
it? Yeah.
And at the end of it, Willie is actually using the Scared So What app himself to manage the personal change. So it's a
Oh,
little fast, but it's realistic. We
yeah.
haven't taught how to manage this change for ourselves, and it doesn't matter if you're in sales or where you are. It's how do you think about it? And If you read the chapter, it'll be interesting to see your thoughts on the believability of the outcome for Willie and for the story that we're trying to tell.
Yeah. No, I'm very much looking forward to seeing the book in its full glory. And I know that those of you reading the chapter, particularly the chapter that Grant is writing about, will be in, see very much the link between his Scared So What kind of framework that many of us have seen on his TED Talks and so on. But from a coaching perspective, Grant, because I know that the other sort of thing that you're passionate about is coaching.
Yes.
And I just wonder if you could just to talk through what some of the outputs of this chapter has from a coaching perspective. What are you hoping to achieve for people who've read your chapter about coaching?
Yeah. For sales leaders, you should then have an introduction to what is true coaching. And, so much that I see throughout call centers around the world, field sales, account management sales, sales support and sales enablement professionals around the world, we have a misunderstanding of what is coaching. And so much of the time we get that confused with mentoring and advice giving. And that's just not exactly what coaching is. Coaching, and as you know, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because I am a certified coach with Consalia and ILM. But it is about fostering the learning and development of the person you're coaching. It's not about you. It is nothing to do with you. All you are is the facilitator. And in this, you use open-ended questions and pause and don't be afraid of the silence so that you can facilitate that learning for the coachee. And
Mm,
from there, you're pulling the information out of them. 9 times out of 10, we've got the solutions in our heads. It's that we get stuck in this assumption, we get stuck in this confusion, and we don't have the time to critically think. And that's what coaching is. You are a facilitator, allowing the coachee ample time to reflect and find the solution that they need. And that is what you will find when you read this chapter. How I've set it up is I am the coach and Willie Loman is the coachee. And so you see clearly our roles, and you can see how by me asking the open-ended questions, Willie is then able to have coaching and reflection facilitated for him. And then you can see the outcomes. So
mm.
if you're reading through the book, you should be able to pick up a true example of what is certified coaching, then be able to then take that and put it into your practice. And I'll also give you a tidbit at the end of the chapter. We give you a QR code, and you can actually download the app right then and there.
Yeah, that's absolutely fabulous. Well, I think that that's probably given us enough of an overview of the chapter, Grant. So thanks so much. Very much looking forward to its publication in a few weeks' time. And yeah, I'm sure the book will be a great seller. So it certainly will be part of the Sales Transformation Masters program that we have, you know, as well. It'll be on the reading list for sure. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me on the show, and thanks as always for leading sales and pioneering transformation for us all.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. So, uh, Barbara, thanks so much for taking part in this sales podcast. This is really linked to the publication of a book that's coming out called Leading Sales Transformation, a reflection of sales practitioners. So, I want to congratulate you for being very shortly a published contributor to a book. I think it's the 26th of April it's coming out. So
Yes,
that's
indeed.
pretty amazing.
Thank you.
Hey, Barbara, I wonder if you could just talk us through, first of all, the title of your book, which is really a brilliant title, and what has brought you to write this particular chapter in the book. And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your story about how the chapter was formed.
Yes, and the title indeed is a quote from a book that I've been avidly reading. And again, I read it twice. I read it when I was younger and read it again as I drew parallels in my chapter. And the reason why I decided to use this title is because at times we don't embrace change as we should, and we resist some sort of change in our life, and we have fear of change. And I talk about a few fears there that I've experienced myself. So what I wanted to do is bring in my own experience, but also take it further, not make it so subjective, but look at the universal. I'm using universal, but more of a generic term, and look at what's affecting people who are going through change. So that's what I've been trying to do in my chapter.
And I know that you've probably sort of developed your chapter, further to the dissertation you wrote on the master's program. So I can see links and I can see the inspiration for this, very much influenced by Christine Eastman, who has this passion for literature. Yeah,
Indeed.
to talk about the leopard, which you also mentioned in your dissertation, the book. And I was going to ask you, actually, are you Sicilian? Is that where your family background is?
I am not, but at the time, so I'm not Sicilian, but my family come from Naples. And at the time, that region was to be unified. So the cultural similarities, and also my family come from a very close region to Sicily. So I am very much my background, my family come from that side of Italy. So it brings it very close to our legacy.
Yes, and of course the book that you've referred to as The Leopard. I wonder if you can just quickly just talk us through, the book and why it sort of inspired you to write this chapter.
Yes, and I'll look more at the individual side of the book rather than historical, but I can certainly mention that it talks about the Italian Risorgimento and the changes which were happening because there was this unification objective, really, and there were some of the current political positions that were being overthrown, if we can define it as such. So there was this situation of change and resistance to this movement. And the reason why I'm very interested in it is because it brings out the culture, it brings out the traditions that had continued over the years. And there is still an attachment to what the past was without taking consciousness of the future. And I have drawn parallels with this because whenever individuals are put through a very high level of change and disruption, they try to hold on to something they're very familiar with. So it's either the past, it is either habits and routine, rather than trying to understand how this change is impacting them on a day-to-day basis and what they can do. And this is, linked to perhaps the other chapters and some of the other chapters whereby it's an introspective look at how we can react and act.
Yes, and that very much links what you just said to the title, which is if you want things to stay as they are, things will have to change. So you talk about the fear of change, don't you, quite predominantly? And I love the way you've started to break that down into 3 parts.
Yes.
And I know that people will gain, of course, more from reading the chapter in the book, but could you give a short sort of overview of the 3 fears that you have you're writing about in this particular chapter?
Yes, and I'll speak about the 3 fears, but also this is a collection of interviews that I have done, obviously, throughout my project, conversations with executives, and also my own experience. And the 3 fears that I quote are fear of the unknown, fear of irrelevance, and fear of failure. And
Right.
I'll just explain very briefly each one. Fear of the unknown is fear. I mean, for example, myself, I've changed career a few times, and
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know what's coming. I don't necessarily know all the time if I am equipped to face every situation. But that's part of this ambiguous world anyway. So why should it be fear? Why should it not be courage? Why should it not be excitement? And fear of relevance, again, the fear of not being good enough, for example, not being capable, not being competent enough, and holding on to what we have done in the past for so many years because it has served us well, and not being able to adapt to new ways and readapt those competencies. And then fear of failure, of course. What if, I don't get this right? What if I am, what is the perception of others? And I look at the concept of failure as well, because it shouldn't be called failure. It should be trial and error, because
Yeah.
all the most important discoveries
Mm.
were really arrived at by trial and error. It's not failure, it's a process, and it's learning in the process.
Yes, I think it's great that you've broken it down into those three dimensions, and at a personal level, and perhaps being an entrepreneur, talking about the word failure, is as I've never seen failure as a negative. I must admit, as a negative thing, because you learn so much from failure. I personally learn more from failure than perhaps getting things right. But I have found that outside of the world of being an entrepreneur, that others have a very different perspective of failure. And it really is quite a deep-rooted fear, and it restricts their ability to experiment and try things out. And sort of twisting that round as a leader, therefore, of people, which of course I am now in my company, I can see that how as a leader can you create an environment where people can not be frightened, certainly fear of making mistakes. I know I've only focused on the failure element of your fear dimensions, because relevance, God, that's so important. That sense of feeling as though you're not relevant for your clients, not relevant for the company, not relevant for others. Yeah, that's quite a deep-rooted fear. And I think we've all been in situations where we felt that we've not been relevant. Just so interesting. Really like the way you've broken it down into those three areas.
Thank you. And I do like to analyze very much the fears, because only by understanding exactly where we sit, because it could be a
Yeah,
combination of the three, right? It could be
yeah,
each one at different stages. If we look at, it's almost like the stages of grief,
yeah,
where we analyze where we are, and we understand how to approach them, almost like an external. And this is why in my chapter, you can see I share very much and very openly my experience, my struggle. When I reread my chapter, I
yeah,
relive the same pain and the same suffering that I did when I wrote it. So it brings back emotionally that journey, which
yes,
enabled me to identify where I needed to focus and what I needed to work on. And
yes,
sometimes it was just acceptance.
yes. When you sort of look at yourself, Barbara, and you think of those three fears, are there any of those three fears? Quite a personal question, this one, that you fear most of all?
At different stages,
Okay.
I've very much experienced the failure and irrelevance,
Yeah.
and I'm perhaps going through more of the unknown now.
Okay.
But I'm accepting that those fears are completely acceptable, that
Right.
there is nothing wrong in having those fears. And I just need to understand why they're signals, because
Right.
emotions are signals.
So do you in your chapter sort of give some sort of ideas on how people can confront their fears?
I do and I don't, in the sense that I make suggestions as to what people can do to recognize,
Yeah.
to accept, and to use those signals. And I I don't want to give the ending of my chapter away,
Of
but there
course.
is a great, yeah. So I'm trying to give some keys here, but
Yeah.
not so much. But in the end, there is a lot of acceptance, but a joyful acceptance that I should be focused on the things that I can change
Yeah.
instead of being distracted by the environment and the things that I can't. And at times we project external challenges and we turn them into our fears, and we should definitely detach that. So
Yeah.
that is what I allude to in the chapter,
Yes.
which I would hopefully like people to read as well.
Of course. No, it's interesting. As I've read I must admit I haven't read The Leopard, and I'm going to go out and buy it because you've intrigued me. Of course I've heard about the book, but I've not yet read it. And I was thinking about what book would I use if I were writing a chapter, in this book. And one of the books that had a rather profound impact on me when I was younger was a book called Herzog by Saul Bellow. And it was kind of a journey about someone who, actually, the opening line of his book was, "If I'm out of my mind, it's all right with me." And it was a kind of a reflection of sort of going through life and failing a lot, and then but coming to terms with yourself after a period of time, but through a lot of pain. And I think that you talk about pain in your chapter, and possibly following a similar theme to the leopard. But it's really interesting, this idea of being on a journey, coming to terms with who you are, the authentic self, um, giving yourself the space to accommodate your fears. I think what you've done here with your chapter is given people a framework to think about it, which I think will be incredibly helpful, for people to know more about. So no, I can't wait for the book to be published, Barbara, as I'm sure you can't. It's going to be
Yeah,
amazing, isn't it? A big party time.
indeed. I'm looking forward to it, because what I wanted to do as well is not talk about it, about just the business side
Yes, that's
of
right.
change,
Yeah.
right? And put out my personal experience, open it up, and just say, this is what I've been through, and almost encourage people to go through that journey of recollection and experience of what they have, or they might be going through, or they may be going through in the future.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. Well, congratulations of being a published author as well, as
Thank you.
your master's dissertation success, which I really enjoyed as well. So, Barbara, it's onwards and upwards for you. I wonder what the next steps are in your life's journey. Maybe you're not able to share that with us just at the moment, but it's been fantastic to have you on the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'm certainly looking forward to a few changes in professional academic world as well, and looking forward to the book being published. And thank you very much for being able to be on the podcast and talk about the book.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.